For how to set up SSH login on a Cisco switch. It is always preferred to use SSH over Telnet because SSH uses encryption, which means the data is secure from eavesdropping. In Telnet, everything's sent plaintext over the network, which is never a good idea. But SSH does require some additional setup versus Telnet, which we'll be going over today, how to do that. So let's get started. Okay, so the first step in setting up SSH is to set up a management IP on the switch. So to do this, we need to create an interface VLAN with the IP address and subnet mask. Since this switch is just a blank switch, every port is in VLAN 1 right now. So right now I have one physical port on the switch connected to my home network, which this PC is also connected to. So we want to put IP on VLAN 1, which that port's in, so that way I can get to the switch or SSH into the switch from my PC. So to do this, we need to go into configuration mode, and then we just need to set up the interface VLAN 1 and put in the IP address, which for this switch we will be using 192.168.1.163 with a subnet mask of .24 or /24. No, I'll put 255. Alright, we want to say no shut just to ensure that it is up. Alright, another thing that you might want to do is put in the default gateway for the switch. In case you want to access it from a different subnet, it needs to know the router that will be able to get to that address. So we'll just say IP default gateway, and we'll put in the gateway. Okay, so now that we did that, we can verify by doing show IP interface brief. We'll say exclude unassigned, so that way we only get that one. And you can see that it is now created with the status of up and up. So let's go to PowerShell and ensure that we can get to it from the PC. Might take a second, might miss one. And there we go. Alright, so now that we created the management IP, we can move on to the next step. Okay, now that we created the management IP, now we can move on to the next step, which is to assign the switch a host name and a domain name, which it will use to generate the crypto key. So this is easy. All we have to do is go into config mode and then say host name and give it a host name that we want, or we can leave it switch if we wanted to, or we can just assign a new one, say switch 1, and then we'll give it the domain name. So we'll say IP domain name. We'll just say xyz.com. Alright, now that we did this, we can move on to generating the RSA key. Okay, so now that we did that, now we're ready to generate the RSA key. So to do this, we need to go into config mode again, and then we'll just say crypto key generate, and it will give us an option to do RSA, which we want to do. We'll press enter, and it will ask us for a key size. We want at least, I think, 700 and something for SSH v2, so we'll say 1024. Alright, now that it did that, we are ready to move on to configuring the VTY lines. Alright, so the next step is to configure the VTY lines, which we can do by, in config mode, going to line VTY, and we'll put the starting line, which we'll say 0, and then we can say, this gives the option up to 1500, but we'll say 4, so it allows 5 connections. and now we need to tell it to how to log in, what we need to use to authenticate, and we need to tell it to only allow SSH. So we can say login local, so that way we can create a local account on the switch, don't need to use a remote server to authenticate, which would be recommended in a production environment, but for this we're just going to use a local username and password. So we'll say login local, and then we want to, I need to go back to that. We need to say transport input SSH, which will only allow SSH connections to those lines. You could also say telnet if you wanted to, but since we're only doing we only want SSH because telnet's insecure, we'll just say SSH. Alright, now that we did that, we just need to create the username and password and we should be able to log in. Alright, so now we need to create our local username and password on the switch to authenticate, and we also need to create an enable password so that when we log in via SSH we can go to a privileged exec or enable mode. So to create a username and password for a user, we just say username whatever, Josh. And then we want to say password and then the password name. We can also assign privilege levels if you want to limit the access that certain users have, but that's outside of this video. So we'll say password and Cisco. Now to create an enable password, we just need to say enable and then password and then password, which we'll say Cisco also. Alright, now that we did all of that, we should be able to SSH with our computer. Let's go to PuTTY. Type in the IP address 192.168.1.163. We'll open it up and it will ask us this the first time you connect to a new switch or server. Right, put in our username, switch Josh, and then the password, which was Cisco. And we're in the switch. Now we can do enable and our enable password, and there we go. So in this video we learned how to set up the management IP for the switch, the hostname domain name, generate the RSA keys, configure the VTY lines, create a local username and password so that we are able to remotely manage the switch via SSH. If you have any comments or questions, just leave them in the comments section below, and thank you for watching.